Hi, my name is Kelli Needham, and I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator from Brighton, Colorado. And I'm excited to share with you a technique today that I like to call Textured Designer Series Paper, or DSP for short. I really like the look of Designer Series paper. There are so many different choices that you can choose from. I'm going to show you some examples of some of the ones that Stampin' Up! Carries. They have a fabulous line of Designer Series papers from what I like to call the basics, which this is an example of the Subtles Designer Series paper stack, and it comes in 6x6 sheets. As you can see, it has really neat designs on each one of the sheets. Comes in the color combination of all of the Subtles colors that come in that group. And you can see they have different designs on each one. Each color comes with 2 different designs that are both double-sided. So you have 4 designs altogether, and I believe you get like 2 to 4 sheets of each one. So that's one of the examples of what I like to consider a basic Designer Series paper. We have basic Designer Series papers also that come in lots of different prints and patterns. And the one that we're going to be working with today is called Perennial Essence, and it is absolutely gorgeous. It has a lot of florals that look like they are painted on canvas. I'm hoping you can see that canvas look to that paper right there. This is the print I'm going to be working with today. So it has florals on one side, and a lot of the patterns have more of a watercolor or subtle background on them. Here's just a couple of the examples. So these are the 2 that are front and back here. Again, really bold, pretty florals with a lot softer images on the back side. But they all have this watercolor or oil painted on canvas look. And so it has a lot of texture to it as it is. But I'm going to show you how to add a little bit of extra texture onto your Designer Series paper. Now, Stampin' Up! Along with their main line of Designer Series papers also has what they call Specialty Designer Series papers. Here's the last one in this set of papers. And I want to show you a couple of examples of what they mean by Specialty Designer Series papers, because sometimes in the catalog it's really hard to tell what those specialty accents are. So this is called Mosaic Mood. For example, it is one that has clear embossed designs on the paper itself, so it actually comes that way, and I'm really hoping that you guys can see that. There we go. You can see those shiny accents, and these come in 12x12 sheets, but it's hard to show the detail in such a large sheet. So you can see these hummingbirds here can actually be cut out and used as their own separate element on a card. This one here is the mosaic tiles, and I really like this. You can see all of that embossed detail. Just adds so much texture to the cardstock. This one here is a little bit more subtle. It has some nice detail to those roses. Again, another one that has a lot of bold accent is this leaf design. It's just absolutely gorgeous paper, and I love the look of that clear embossed accents over it. Now this one again is a little bit more subtle, has smaller detailed images on there. And just to give you an idea, this is some of the images that are on the back. Now the back side does not have the clear embossing on it, but it does have some really beautiful images as well. So you can use these on their own, or you can pair them up and use them in different ways with the pieces that are embossed and some of the ones that are not. Another set of paper that Stampin' Up! Has, and this is in the holiday catalog, has gold foiled accents to it, and you can see that here on these wrapped in plaid pieces. It has little gold accents embossed into the paper itself. So that's just another idea of what a Specialty Designer Series paper is like. Now, my idea for this video came from the Mosaic Moods Designer Series paper, and I wanted to recreate something along those lines with that clear embossed image, but on regular Designer Series paper. So I'm going to use that Perennial Essence, and I want to show you on my sample here, I have embossed over the top of my Designer Series paper one of our background stamps to get that clear embossed look. So I'm going to bring in the elements to show you what I'm using, and we're going to get started on this project today. So all of my measurements are here on this piece of paper, and I did miss a couple of things, so I'll mention those as we're going. But I'm starting out with a piece of 8.5 by 5.5 Calypso coral cardstock. I also have a piece of Blackberry Bliss cardstock that measures 5 1/8 by 3 7/8. I have 2 pieces of Designer Series paper. Here, one is going to be 5 inches by 2 3/4 inches, and then also I'm going to need a piece that is 5 inches by 1 1/4 inches. And as you can see, that peach colored, I believe it is Petal Pink, that is the back side of this really pretty floral print that looks like it has been oil painted. Also, along with that, you're going to need some scrap pieces that are Whisper White, Blackberry Bliss, Shaded Spruce, Old Olive, our Vellum cardstock, and our gold foil cardstock. And we'll be using those a little bit later here. But to get started, I want to do all of our stamping first. So the first piece I'm going to bring in is going to be my scrap of Whisper White. And what you want is a piece that is big enough for our story label punch that we're going to be using. And this is our story label punch here. It's kind of hard to see in the light. Oh, and before I go on, let me show you the different stamp set and dies that we're going to be using here. So I am using First Frost, which has these really beautiful, almost watercolor look images and some sentiments that work not only for everyday things, but there's also one here that could work for holidays as well. And I'm also going to be using with that the Frosted Bouquet dies. We no longer call them framelits, so they're just called dies. But it has these images in here that cut out all kinds of different florals. And then it also has some tag dies and some dies that cut out those roses specifically. But we're going to be using these 3 right here that cut out the floral images. So move that out of the way. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the 2 rose stamps. So we have a large and a small. And I'm going to be using Petal Pink Classic Pad and Calypso Coral Classic Pad. So I'll bring those in. And I'm going to take my larger of the 2 images and first make sure that they don't have fuzzy stuff all over them. And I'm going to ink that up with the Petal Pink, and I'm going to stamp that a little bit off to the left of my scrap paper just one time. And we're going to let that dry. Next, I'm going to take the smaller of the 2 roses, and I'm going to use Calypso Coral ink for this one. And I'm going to stamp that right next to the other one. It gives you a really pretty watercolored look to these stamps. They call them distinctive stamps because it has all of your detail in one stamp, as opposed to, say, a solid stamp or a line image stamp. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to stamp with Blackberry Bliss my sentiment on top of this. And I want to get a couple of things ready ahead of time because this part of the stamping has to be done really quickly. So what I'm going to do is bring in my clear embossing powder. And I'm going to use my embossing buddy on this as well, because I want to make sure that my ink, first of all, is really dry, but then I also want to make sure that nothing else sticks to it. So I'm going to use my embossing buddy over the top of that. And then I'm going to take my Blackberry Bliss. Because it is such a heavily pigmented ink, it tends to not dry quite as quickly as the others, but it is still a water-based ink, so it does dry pretty quick. So what I want to do is make sure that my stamp is really well inked up, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment right over the top of those flowers. And right away, I'm going to run that through my clear embossing powder, because I want my words to pick that embossing powder up really quickly. And as you can see, it is kind of a dull looking, has a dull look to it. And I'm going to go ahead and emboss that real quick. So if you can bear with me with the heat tool noise for about 5 seconds here, I'm going to go ahead and emboss this while the camera's still rolling. And it doesn't take very long once you get your heat tool warmed up. You'll be able to see right away where that embossing powder just turns nice and shiny. Alright, Now that I have that done, that's all the embossing you have to endure in this video. I'm going to set that aside. And the next step is to emboss our designer series paper. So I'm going to bring my designer series paper in, and I'm going to bring in my Crackle paint stamp. And this is one of our big background stamps. And just to show you, so everybody asked me, I have the birch background stamp on the other side of my block as well, because I have been using these like crazy in a lot of different projects that I'm doing. So I just have left them mounted on my stamp until I'm done with my projects. So I'm going to bring in my Versamark ink pad, which is a clear watermark ink pad, and it tends to stay sticky a little bit longer, so it's great for embossing. So I'm going to ink up my Crackle paint background stamp, making sure that I cover the whole thing. Alright, now that I have that inked up, I'm going to grab a piece of scrap paper that I have sitting around. And I'm going to turn my designer series paper upside down. I'm going to lay that on top of my stamp. And then I'm going to cover that with my scrap paper. And the reason I do that is, one, I don't want to get ink all over my hands. But two, it gives me a chance to apply a real even pressure to my stamp and make sure that my designer series paper gets completely covered where I want it with that Crackle paint design. And I know it's going to be hard to tell. You can kind of see that in the light there. But now I'm going to take that and I'm going to run that through my little thing of embossing powder here. And as I do that, you'll see that it starts to coat that Versamark with the embossing powder. Turn that around and I'm going to finish that up, making sure that that's all ready to go. Alright, so like I said before, I'm not going to make you endure me embossing this whole piece. I have done that part ahead of time. And I'm going to pull in the one that I magically have done. So as you can see, we have that really pretty Crackle paint texture now on our designer series paper. And it just adds that added element to this card. Let's get my background stamp out of the way here. Alright. So that is all of our stamping that we're going to do on this card. Pretty simple, right? So now what I'm going to do is show you how I put this card together. A couple little tricks. I'm going to bring in all of my card elements, but the piece that I'm going to be working with the first are going to be my Blackberry Bliss and my 2 pieces of designer series paper. And then on my list, which I forgot to mention, is a piece of our metal edged ribbon, and this one happens to be the one with the gold edging on it. You're going to need that as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adhere this Petal pink strip to the front of my Blackberry Bliss. And I'm just using the Tombow adhesive to do that with. And I'm going to layer that on there just like that and stick that down. And then I'm going to want to put on my background piece that has the embossed texture on it. Now, I really have found that sometimes your designer series paper, when you do this technique, it warps a little bit. So I tend to go a little over crazy with the tape because I just want to make sure that everything is stuck down nice and flat. And then I'm going to line that up on the other side. And you want it to overlap this piece just a little bit. That gives it a little bit more of a finished look, as opposed to if you had them butted up next to each other. And originally I was not going to put ribbon on this, but then I decided it needed it. So that really isn't going to matter that much for this card because I'm going to layer this ribbon over the top. Now, a little trick to putting my ribbon on is I'm going to put just a tiny little bit of adhesive in 2 spots where I want my ribbon to go. That way I can line it up on there and I can stick it down just a little bit before I adhere it to the back. This will help it lay nice and flat on the front. And I'm going to turn my piece over and I'm going to apply my adhesive all over the back of this before I stick my ribbon down, because as soon as I'm done with my ribbon, it's going to be ready to go onto my card front. But now that I have that laid nice and flat on the front, I can just fold these ends over, pulling them a little bit tight where I need them to be, and they'll be held in place. And then if you're worried about your cardstock not sticking, you can kind of go back over that and add a little bit more adhesive if you need to. So now I'm going to bring my card base in. It's already scored at 4 1/4, so all I have to do is come in with my bone folder and crease that so I have a nice smooth crease down the edge. And now my card is ready for me to adhere this piece onto the front. So I'm going to line that up just like that and get it all stuck down. Alright, now it is securely on there. We are going to build all of the rest of the elements for this card. Now, I have already pre-die cut all of my pieces. So I'm going to bring those in and show you what I've done. So I die cut from the Vellum cardstock this little floral and leafy piece here, which actually coordinates with one of the stamps in the die set, and so it coordinates with that image right there on the corner. The other pieces that I die cut actually coordinate with this stamp right here, so you could stamp it and die cut it, or you can just die cut out that die by itself. So those two pieces come from this little sprig of leaves right there. And then the last one is the berries that can again either be stamped and die cut. I'm not sure how well this lines up with that one. I don't think that it does, but that just kind of adds a little extra element. Now I actually cut out 3 of these, and I have already glued 2 of them together, and I'll tell you why here in just a second, because I'm going to show you how I finished that. That gives you that little accent right there. So let's start putting these together. I'm going to be using glue dots to put on my die cut pieces. So on the back of this vellum piece, I'm just going to add a couple of glue dots on here. And that piece is going to end up right down here at the bottom of my card. And I want it hanging off to the side over my DSP just a little bit. And I'm going to move it just a smidge. To make sure that it's sticking out quite a ways so that we can see it. And then I'm going to take a glue dot and I'm going to adhere my shaded spruce piece on over here off to the left hand side of the card. And then I'm going to do the same. I'm going to use a glue dot to adhere this old olive piece. And I'm going to move it down just a little bit lower and kind of off more to the right hand side of that ribbon, just to kind of start layering those pieces together. Now I want to put together my little tag here, and I'm going to show you how I did that to get that gold accent on the tag itself. So what I'm going to do is bring in my story label punch and my piece of cardstock that we stamped with the flowers, and I'm going to line that up in here, and I'm going to punch out that part of my stamp, trying to make sure that I have it lined up where the words actually belong where they're supposed to. Alright, so I'm going to punch that piece out. And I've already pre-punched a piece of the gold foil from that same punch. And I'm just going to take a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut that label down the middle. So now I have 2 pieces. On the back of my sentiment piece, I'm going to put a whole bunch of tape. So I'm just going to cover that whole thing. Alright, now that I have that taped really well, I'm just going to take one of these pieces of the gold label, and I'm just going to line that up above my sentiment, and I'm going to stick that down so you can see I now have that fancy little gold edge around there. And I'm going to take the other piece and I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the bottom half of that punch. And that's going to give us just a little bit of a gold outline on there that just adds a little bit of extra detail to it and ties in with our gold ribbon, our metallic edged ribbon. So that piece is all ready to go. I can take some dimensionals and put them on the back of this piece, and it will be all ready to adhere to the card. And I like to put a lot of dimensionals on there because I don't like to have saggy pieces on my card. So let's bring our card back in, and we're going to go ahead and adhere this to the front. Right over the top of all of our other little embellishments. And you can go You can put it more in this way. You can put it more out towards the edge if you want to. I didn't put my ribbon in quite far enough. I kind of wanted to center that, but that'll work. All right, so to finish the last little element that I have here, I want to bring these berries in, and I'm going to show you what I did. So some of you may recognize the name Jennifer McGuire. She does amazing videos and creates all kinds of wonderful projects, and I really like her stuff. And so I tend to watch a lot of her videos, and I get some of my ideas from her. She tends to do a lot more simple projects than I do, which is why I love watching her, because she gives me a lot of inspiration. But one of the things she likes to do is die cut multiple images and then layer them on top of each other to give dimension. So I copied that from her, and I'm just going to take, like I said, I've already done 2 of these. I've glued them together, and I wanted to show you how I did the last one. So I'm using a glue pen that is a 2-way glue pen. It is called the Squeeze and Roll, and I like it because it has this little squeeze thing here, so you control how much glue comes out at one time. But I really like it because it has a ballpoint tip on it and almost like a writing pen, and you can use that to put glue exactly where you want it, especially on fine detailed dies and word dies. So all I'm going to do is tap that on to each one of these little berries, and a little dot of glue comes out. And it makes it really easy to do things like this when you have these fine intricate dies. And then I'm going to go down and put just a couple little dots on my stem all the way down. Now, to make this easier, I'm going to turn this over, and I'm going to line this up with my stem first, and then I can start positioning and moving where I want these to line up at. Once I have them close and semi-stuck down, I can pick this up, and I'm not getting glue all over. But then I can also move around and rearrange these to where they all line up on top of each other. And now my dimensional element here is finished. And I don't know if you can see, it does add a little bit of extra thickness to that die. And so in order to get the 2 little pieces that I have on my card, I actually took scissors. Hopefully you can see that, those 2 little elements right there. Took my scissors, and I decided I wanted to clip off, whoops, this little stem or sprig down here at the bottom. And I did it the opposite way so that I didn't actually cut into my die. So I'm going to cut that apart just like that. I apologize. And to adhere this, I'm actually going to be using the multi-liquid glue, Tombow multi-liquid glue. So I'll bring my card back in. I'm just going to put a little bit of this liquid glue down here on the stem, the base of my berries here. And I'm just going to slide that in behind my die, and then I can just stick it down where I want it to go. Same with the other one, add a little bit on the stem. And then I can position it on the other side. Now just keep in mind you do have a glue dot back behind there, so you want to make sure that you're not running into the glue dot. And you can kind of position that in there wherever you want it to go. And that is now our finished card. I do have some other examples of this same technique that I have used over and over again. Now I did keep the layout exactly the same because I wanted to show you that you can get different looks from doing the same technique on different designer series paper and with different stamps. So let me bring in those examples. So both of these use the Bird Ballad designer series paper. And you can see that they have totally different looks to them, but they both use the birch background die, and so you can see on there that element from the birch background die, or background stamp, I apologize, background stamp. This one uses crosses of hope and varied vases as the images on the front. This one here does use Free as a Bird, and again you can see that birch background over the top of that flowered paper just gives it a really sweet little element or added detail to that. And then I just took this leafy stamp here and stamped it on this piece to get that extra texture on there, almost creating your own kind of designer series paper. The next one uses the wrapped in foil specialty paper on the bottom, but I did use the buffalo check background on over the top of that stocking paper to kind of give it a little bit more of a plaid texture. And I know it's kind of hard to see some of these on there, but hopefully you can see that. And then I just pulled some different dies out of my stash and made these little sprigs and leafy things, and gold embossed my sentiment to kind of pull all that gold foil out of the designer series paper itself. The next two use Press Petals designer series paper, and it already has like a burlap texture to it, or a look to it, with the pressed flowers, but I wanted to add that crackle paint on there to add the little extra element on there. So on the first one I did the clear embossing powder, and I wanted to see what it looked like if I changed it up and did a white crackle over the designer series paper, and I think it turned out really cool. It really makes it look vintagey and distressed. And you can see this paper here again is the opposite of that one. And then this is our Petals washi tape, just little flower petals that you can peel off and turn into a flower themselves. Really pretty and fun. And then this one uses To a Wild Rose as the flower in that, from that stamp set, to make my accent or focal point on the front of this card. Now the last two examples that I'm going to show you, they both use discontinued papers and discontinued background stamps, which I apologize for that, but I still wanted to show you the samples because I think they turned out really neat, and it just goes to show you can use something you already have in your stash. This one here uses the marbled background that we had. I think it left the catalog from last year, but it does give kind of a neat effect over the designer paper there. And then again, another background stamp that has been retired is the wood grain background stamp, but I really liked the wood grain look over this Christmas paper, especially with the pine cones. Thought it gave it just a really neat texture and added detail to it. So you can see without that added detail, this card would be really pretty along with the rest of them, but that just adds that little added bit of interest. So hopefully you enjoyed this technique, and hopefully you decide that you want to try something similar to it or try it at home. If you liked my video, please hit like and share. And if you're interested in purchasing any of the products that I've shown you on the video today, they will be listed in the description. And you can visit creationcorner.stampinup.net to find me. And hopefully I will see you again soon. Thank you.